Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, and I'm joined by attorney Stephen Jessup, and we're going to talk about Parkinson's disease and long-term disability insurance. And Stephen, in this video, the goal is to provide some tips, what to expect, and kind of provide a guide through talking about some of our experiences with these long-term disability insurance claims for people with Parkinson's. We've represented hundreds of individuals who have been diagnosed with this disease and help them to get approved, whether they were initially applying or they were denied at some point as a result of this diagnosis. So first thing I want to get into when it comes to Parkinson's is what type of medical evidence is the disability insurance company going to expect to see in order for someone to prove the claim?
Well, it's like every other claim. Your medical evidence is going to be the foundation of a claim. Now with Parkinson's, generally speaking, since it is a long-term chronic condition that gets worse with time, you will see quite a bit of medical evidence. The issue can be, though, is what's in your medical records. You can have so long that you'll notice in records it'll say that things are stable, there's been no changes, stuff like that. So the medical documentation is very important. Everyone understands and knows that Parkinson's is a severe condition, but the insurance companies still do look at it with quite a bit of scrutiny because for the most part, people have worked, with the condition for an extended period of time.
And so obviously the medical evidence is extremely important and has to be well documented. The challenge that we often find, and it's never the fact that they challenge the diagnosis of Parkinson's. It's very rare they go, well, we don't think you have Parkinson's. What it comes down to is that Parkinson's, as you know, is a chronic degenerative central nervous system disorder that unfortunately gets worse over time. And very often, the people we represent have either had the diagnosis and were treating for a while, or, and I'd say that the or that I'm about to mention is more often than not, is they don't treat with doctors for a while, and the symptoms, because a lot of people don't like to go to the doctor. The symptoms get to the point where they finally do go to a doctor, and when they end up talking to the doctor and explaining how long they've been dealing with certain things, it turns out it's been 2 or 3 years already that they're having the symptoms. And when you look at this Parkinson's scale, this stage 1 through 5 that people can be at, they don't show up at the office in a stage 1. They're showing up at like a stage 3 or 4 already, where their symptoms have reached the point, where they're having great difficulties functioning at work already. How should a claimant go about properly documenting their conditions due to the fact that it's a chronic degenerative change in your physical abilities?
There's no one size fits all on how you do this because it's all going to be into the context of your job, what the occupational duties are, and then also how the condition is affecting you. I've had cases where it's more of a cognitive issue and others where it's more physical or a combination thereof. So it's a matter of how it's personally affecting you in the context of the type of work you do. For instance, a client of mine who is an executive for a large company, it was more the cognitive and, even what he would say is, with the shaking, when that started to get out of control, it became very apparent in board meetings and all kinds of other meetings and impacted what he felt was people's ability to trust in his judgment call and making. Still very bright cognitively speaking, but through testing we're able to show that there are deficiencies that would impair him from doing his high level of executive work. Now, if he didn't have as demanding of a job, would that information have been enough to support a claim? So that's why I say it really is always in the context of what you do, what your occupation was, and how the disease is impacting you, because it impacts everyone differently. There are, hallmarks that you will see, but everyone experiences those very differently.
So, Stephen, we know from handling so many Parkinson's claims, you have your motor deficits and you have your non-motor deficits, and you could have both, or you could have just motor, or you could have non-motor. The disability companies, unfortunately, often focus more on the motor, which would be the shaking, the stiffness, the rigidity, how long can you sit, can you stand, can you walk, and often they'll try to dial it in so much on this motor and be like, We understand you have the shaking. We understand you're stiff. We understand you might have difficulty walking or sit, stand. But we think you can sit for 4 hours a day, and therefore you can continue to do your sedentary type job. And then they completely ignore the non-motor, which is the cognitive, which is unfortunately a huge aspect as well of someone who's diagnosed with Parkinson's. What additional tool or medical evidence have you advised clients to seek in order to help prove their cognitive limitations that they're suffering as a result of Parkinson's?
From cognitive, it's neuropsychological testing. That's probably the gold standard of what an insurance company is going to look for to support and document. They will not take your subjective complaints or anything in your records, truly to heart without hard evidence backing it. And it's also important in the context of the neuropsychological testing, that the examiner does know that Parkinson's is the root cause of why you're wanting to have the testing done, so it doesn't try to get pigeonholed into some type of secondary depression issue, but also an understanding of your pre-morbid functioning, your education level, what your job was. Because if you were, say, for instance, in high average or superior pre-morbid intellectual functioning, and now you're showing average, well, average looks like, all right, well, you're where everyone else is, but that does show a marked decline from where you should be or would have been, prior to, the testing. So it's also important that testing is done in the context of, the nature of Parkinson's, and then also what your pre-level pre-disability, if you will, education, your work experience, and those things.
I know, Stephen, you were talking about an executive that we represented within the past few years, and then recently we represented an accountant that contacted us where he was saying, look, I've had this Parkinson's diagnosis for 5-6 years. I don't really have the motor type disorders that you commonly see. But he said, things are taking me 3 to 4 times longer than they used to. I understand what I'm doing, but it's 3 to 4 times longer. I can't take on as many clients. I forget certain things I'm doing. But I'm really most concerned that it's not fair to my clients that a task is taking 3 to 4 times longer than what it should be. Is this enough for me to reach the level where I can file for disability? And is that enough for a person when they say, look, I can still do it, but it's taking me so much longer to do what I used to do?
It depends. It really depends. And we've had situations where people put in, extraordinary hours just to keep up with the work. And, in the context of group disability insurance through an employer, you're working for the insurance company. Now, depending on your policy language, especially if you have individual disability coverage, where there's an idea of, sometimes we'll see definitions of disability, specifically partial and residual, where you're not able to do the job, for the normal hours required type thing. And, situations like that could occur. And, arguably if you, an accountant working for yourself or whatever the case may be, eventually those clients are going to leave you, so there is going to be the reduction in earnings and work duties based on your medical. So all these things, though, need to be presented properly to the insurance company, because they're still going to take a look at it. Well, you've been able to work with this, so what's changed? And that's where new information, like the neuropsychological testing, can come into great help in showing that, yeah, you may be able to do this, but it's taking longer. Another thing as an accountant is attention to detail is so important. A messed up, mathematical problem or decimal point in the wrong spot can have disastrous effects for people. So is it enough? Maybe is ultimately the answer. It's really going to have to deal with what's in your records and, every issue you may be having in the workplace setting. So there's really no hard, fast yes. When people want definitive answers, it's hard. You'd love to give them because obviously they're worried, they have the medical condition, it's impacting their livelihood, I'm sure other aspects of their life. And as a lawyer, you'd love to give them some sense of comfort that things are going to work out. But unfortunately, there's no definitive answer anyone can ever give you. Can it? Yes, but we need to see if the information is going to truly support, what your complaints are.
So you touched on earlier, and we know there's always this important correlation between your medical condition and the duties of your occupation, and you have to not necessarily rely on an employer's job description. You have to go above and beyond and put in as much objective objective evidence about your occupational duties that you can find, whether it's statements from coworkers, industry studies about how things are done, schedules, calendars, showing all of the different examples of your work product so that the disability carrier really understands the complicated nature of what you were doing and what a typical day was like. And then even trying to relate that to say, I don't even care if you look at it just how I did it for my employer, but every employer would have to have an employee do this job in this manner. And that becomes super important because then you have to correlate that with the symptoms that the person is experiencing. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time proving to the disability insurance carrier that this job is so much more than just sitting for 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day in order to do my job, that there's a strong schedule, cognitive component, run and gun. Every day has a bunch of things going on, and you can't just look at this job, and we say this all the time, to say, well, if I could sit here for 4 hours, then my education, my experience, and everything else that's required doesn't matter at all. But the disability companies, the treating doctors need to be aware that Parkinson's doesn't necessarily always affect your activities of daily living. You can live a normal life, and often it does not change someone's life expectancy at all. But living a normal life and possibly bathing yourself, changing yourself, going to the bathroom, the typical ADLs as to what they're called, are not the same as doing the duties of a job 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. How important is it for the claimants to advise their doctors that they may be contacted by the disability insurance company, by their in-house doctor or an outside doctor, asking them about their functionality, but yet these insurance companies don't say, oh, by the way, doc, it's the functionality to do all of these duties of a job. So how do you advise your clients to prepare their doctors for this type of phone call?
In a lot of ways, it's having to do with just that what you mentioned. This is a disability policy, and what the language of that policy is. If it's the inability to do your occupational duties, it's the doctor understanding that. And the good thing with a lot of doctors, since they have their own coverage, they have a general idea of how this may work. I don't take for granted that they do, but they generally have some idea of disability. And it's also another important thing. This isn't Social Security disability. This is in the context of, can you do your job? It's not whether you can grocery shop, you can change your clothes, do these activities of daily living. As we know, the insurance companies will try to strip down occupations to the physical demand levels, right? Well, do you think they'd be able to sit? Do you think they'd be able to lift up to 10 pounds? A lot of times doctors would be like, yeah, I could see that. Yes, I think they could lift 10 pounds kind of thing with this condition. But that's not what it's about. It's can they do their work? So it's important that you have the conversation with the doctor. And then, I've been fortunate in a lot of the cases I've represented with Parkinson's where clients have been to the doctor enough, have a good relationship with their neurologists. A lot of times I've seen where the neurologists and the records have been encouraging someone to, take a step back years in advance, and the person kind of keeps gutting through it, so the doctors are on board. But it's always important, and if we're getting claim forms out for doctors, I personally in all my correspondence will explain what the definition of disability is, that this is only in the context of doing these occupational duties. If this is an employer-provided policy, I also impress upon them the importance of what they document in their records, because they're not going to be deposed, they're not going to testify at trial kind of thing. So just getting these doctors prepared that this has not to do with what you can do day in, day out, normal life living, but can you specifically do these jobs? And you're right. I think of two, and then one in particular, I've represented two OBGYNs with Parkinson's, and they contacted me when their cases were denied. So here we are with people with, medical records documenting tremors, but the insurance company saying, we think you can deliver babies and perform surgeries regardless of this. So they may have been fine in their everyday activities, but it's the context of what they have to do for a living. That's why it's so important to have that discussion with your doctors. And when people say, oh, I have Parkinson's, this should get approved. Well, ideally, yes, it should. But like I usually tell them, I've represented OBGYNs with Parkinson's who have been denied. So an insurance company is always going to be looking at your claim and how do we deny this, not how do we approve this.
Right, and they're going to look at what treatments have you taken, what medications, what therapies have you done, and have you exhausted options to...
I just got an email from an insurance carrier wanting to know if my client has undergone deep brain stimulation yet. So they're always following up, wanting to know, is this person getting treatment that's going to put him back to work, kind of thing, even though that he's been on claim for years and everything's pretty solid and sound right now. But they're still always going to want to know, what treatment are you doing?
Is that client going to be required to get that deep brain stimulation?
No, they're not. It was a recommendation potentially in the records. And then the doctor, just with where things are, isn't recommending it at this point. But I think it was the insurance company, seeing it in the records going, ooh, well, maybe here's something for us. So they're definitely not of an opinion that he has to have it done in order to continue to receive benefits.
Right. So we scratched the surface on some of our experiences with Parkinson's disease and disability claims, and some tips that can help people be put in a better position to get their claim approved. What we really encourage you to do is to reach out to Stephen, myself, or any of our lawyers. Send us a copy of your disability policy or a copy of your denial letter. We will immediately set a phone conference and provide you with a free consultation where we will discuss all of your options and how we think we can help you. We also encourage you to spend a little bit of time on our website, search your disability company or search your occupation or your medical condition. You're going to find a lot of resolved cases, reviews about your company, questions and answers that all of our lawyers have answered over the years from people in a situation similar to yours. The reason we're offering all of this information is that we want you to be really educated about this disability insurance claim process, because we believe that the more you know, the better position you'll be in to get your claim approved, and you'll be able to think like a disability insurance company, which is super helpful when it comes time to take the right actions to keep your benefits from being denied. So no matter where you live in the country, we're available to assist you, and we look forward to speaking with you should you need us in the future. Thank you.